All right. Hello, everybody. It's the Meista, your favorite drinking heavy metal buddy from Brews and Tunes. I am here today. I'm super excited. I'm talking to Matt Harvey, guitar player, vocalist from legendary bands like Exhumed, Gruesome, one of my favorite bands, and multitude of other bands he's played in. So super excited to be talking with you, Matt. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if I would have planned a little bit better, I would have had a beer, and I could really use one because it's 100 degrees today.
Oh,
But
yeah.
that was just bad planning on my part. And I had my dog with me, so I didn't want to leave her in the car while I ran into the store. But anyway, I'll be drinking in spirit.
All right, cool. Well, cheers to you then.
All right.
All right. So I guess maybe to get started, why don't we talk a little bit about kind of what you've been up to lately? What projects you're working on? From what I understand, Exhumed has been doing some work in the studio recently. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. I'm here in the control room of our studio here in beautiful San Luis Obispo, California, where we are sort of inches away from finishing our 8th album.
Nice.
I'm personally done, so now I'm just waiting on the last vocals from Ross, and our guitar player Sebastian is going to do some vocals as well. So that's been pretty cool to to get that done. It's been kind of weird because now we built this studio when we were doing our last record, Horror, and this is the first time that we really had time to take our time. And so we started in April, and now it's getting to like mid-June, and we're almost done. And it's a weird feeling because usually we're sort of racing towards the finish line, but this time it's much more laid back. So that's almost done, and then I'm gonna have a solo record that comes out in August.
Oh, wow.
And then I'll have another project that I guess I should not announce because it hasn't been announced yet. That will be we'll have an EP coming out in September.
Oh, cool.
And I'm going to Florida in a couple of weeks or a month now to play a couple of shows with Gruesome, and we'll be working on, or in theory, we'll be working on stuff for a new record that we hope to record by the end of the year as well. So,
oh, excellent. That's great news. Yeah, it sounds like you're really busy. Got a lot of irons in the fire right now. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of time to write and sort of get stuff going last year, obviously.
Right.
Not going on tour, and I had a few months off work. Anyway, I've been very fortunate to, still have a job. My wife is working. We're in good health and all that stuff. But I had a lot of time to sort of get things rolling, and now they're sort of all kind of coming together in one bunch. It's like a bottle of ketchup. You shake it and nothing comes out, and then the whole fucking bottle sort of just
right. Right. Yeah, it seems like like you said, you got a lot going on. That's really cool. And I'm super excited to. I did not know that you were working on a solo album. That's interesting.
It'll be interesting because it's got nothing to do with metal whatsoever, or
really
horror or anything spooky. It's more like my attempt at creating what would be film music, although there's no film. It's just me writing music. So I have no idea if there's like an audience for it at all, but we'll see what happens.
Nice. Are there vocals? Is it instrumental?
There's no vocals whatsoever. It's all
okay.
It's basically, it's all virtual instruments, but it's a mix of like symphonic instruments and synth and a little bit of everything. So
interesting. Yeah,
it's way different.
Yeah, definitely different from pretty much anything you've done. That's cool. That's exciting. That's interesting.
That was my attempt at, everyone said, oh, learn a skill during the pandemic while you have downtime. And so I guess when the album comes out, we'll see if I've learned it to the level where it's a skill or not. But I'm excited about it.
That's very cool. You're playing all the instruments?
I'm programming all the instruments basically with today's technology. Generally, if you're listening to like music in a TV show or unless it's a major TV show, or you're listening to like video game music, generally it's all like synthetic instruments. So
Right.
that's
Okay.
kind of the world that I'm in, where it's pure composition and engineering,
Wow.
and a very little bit of like, sort of keyboard work, because I'm a terrible keyboard player.
Nice. I'm really interested to hear this. This is
Well,
going. And you said that'll be coming out towards possibly in the fall or end of the year?
That's going to be in August.
Oh, August. Okay.
And then the other project that I guess there's slightly more at stake with that one, so I don't want to screw it up by telling too much. But that will come out in September.
Okay.
So.
Nice. Very cool. So I know you can't talk about that project, but as far as the new Exhumed album, so obviously with horror, I got a copy of it right here.
Oh,
killer album. Yeah, love that album. And you guys kind of did kind of a thrash vibe with that album, kind of an 80s thrash horror vibe, which was very cool. Is there a concept with the new album? What do you have going on with that?
It's not as conceptual as the last two. It's more of a collection of songs, but with horror, it was sort of like, with horror, we sort of took away as much as we possibly could and then made a record. Whereas with Death Revenge, the one before that, we sort of added as much as we could while still making an Exhumed record. And I think, those were kind of extremes, with horror. Most songs are under 2 minutes. It's very compact. It's, almost a blur in that it's all sort of up tempo all the time. And then with Death Revenge, you had the sort of like cinematic interludes, which is kind of what got me started towards the solo album thing. And then you had a lot more melodic stuff, and we did like a 8-minute instrumental. So I think they're both sort of on the far side, whereas this one is more straight down the middle. I think it's got 10 songs. They're more musically developed than the last album, but we don't go quite as far afield into the melody and stuff as we have before. I mean, it's very much, to my ears, it's very much like a death metal album, pure and simple. I don't know. I mean, we're trying to, the goal is always the same, which is to write sort of convincing songs, but we just kind of, if our style is a box, we kind of try to move around within the box so it's not utterly repetitive,
Right.
Yeah. For ourselves as much as the audience.
And I've always felt everything you guys have done has always been very compelling, I think, and especially these, like horror, the last two albums, and like you said, very divergent, very interesting. That was really cool concept, with doing a concept album about gravediggers. That was really fascinating. And then to turn around and go, okay, we're gonna embrace kind of our thrash roots and horror roots of the 80s. And I loved it. It was great. I mean, as soon as I put that needle down, I was sucked right into that album so quickly.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, man. Yeah. I mean, the Death Revenge was sort of highbrow, the horror was very lowbrow, and then I'd say this is sort of more in the middle. And I think we try to change up. We always try to change up, the engineering styles and the kind of amps we use and the way that we mic the drums and stuff, just because, it's like, on one hand, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But at the same time, we want to give people a reason to check out every record, and for every record to have its own identity, even if, that means, I heard a lot of people be like, when Death Revenge came out, they're like, oh, like, this is pretty good, but I hope this is just an aberration. And then other people were like, oh, this is the best thing they've done. And then when horror came out, I heard the exact same two comments.
Right.
Like, this is pretty good, but I hope it's just like, this isn't just what they're going to do now. And other people are like, this is what I've been waiting for. So, we try to keep people guessing as much as we can while being consistent,
Right. Yeah. Well, that's one thing I'd say is, I don't know if experimental is the right word, but yeah, you've always kind of branched out and tried new ideas, which is, for me, it's what's always kind of definitely drawn me to Exhumed and a lot of your other projects.
Oh, cool. Thanks, man.
And kind of to play off of that, Gruesome, what a cool concept. So for people that don't know about this, it's a homage. It's to Chuck, to Death, the band Death. without being trite though. It's you know, and it's not necessarily nostalgic. It's like, hey, we're gonna do an album in tribute to Death in the style of Death, but our own music, which is a really cool idea. And I was curious, how did that come into fruition? Was that something you had thought about for a long time? Because I know the band has only been around for what, not well, like 6, 7 years now.
Yeah, I guess it has been. I think maybe 7 years. Holy shit. Well, it like a lot of ideas, it sort of started as something not particularly serious. Basically, when Death All started being a thing, I ended up singing and playing guitar on the first iteration of that tour. That's a whole other sort of convoluted story. But anyway, for me, I saw Death twice on Spiritual Healing. I was listening to them since like, 89 when I was a little teenage pipsqueak. And, I saw him for Human, and I saw him for, I can't remember if it was Individual or Symbolic, and I saw him for Sound of Perseverance and whatever. And, obviously Death was a big influence on Exhumed, but I didn't really realize that there was a whole generation of people who had never really experienced that. I took it for granted because, they came around every year. Sometimes they'd cancel because, it was Chuck.
Right.
But anyway, and so when I went out and did those shows, it was really sort of powerful, and seeing how much the music connected with people and seeing how much that music meant to people. Obviously it meant a lot to me, but like I said, I had kind of taken it for granted growing up with it. And anyway, I did the first tour, and that was before they kind of got their ducks in a row, because Eric Greif, who was Death's longtime manager, and Chuck's intellectual property estate manager and Relapse's lawyer, he kind of stepped in and straightened everything out. But the first tour was kind of a mess, and they asked me to come back for the second tour, but Exhumed already had something planned, and I felt like I didn't, I was on my own path, and I was very stoked to have taken part in it and play with some of my heroes like Steve and Gene and stuff. But I was like, cool, I'm doing my own thing. And on the Exhumed tour, we ended up doing a couple of support dates with Death to All. And that's where I met Gus, because he had been really close friends with Sean Reinert forever. He was teching for Sean, and he was playing a song with him every night. I think it was, I want to say, Baptized in Blood. Anyway, Gus and I were talking after the show, and we were both like, what, if we were in charge of Death to All, like he and I would do it, and we would get, like James Murphy and Terry Butler, and just do like the first 3 albums only. And that would be really fun. And, we were like, maybe we'll pitch this to Eric. And I kind of jokingly said, after a few beers, I was like, well, if they don't go for it, I'll just write some Death songs and we can make our own Death band. And wouldn't that be funny? Ha ha ha. And I didn't really think about it. And then a little bit later, I was in England. My wife is British. She now lives here. But I used to, before she moved, obviously I would spend a lot of time in England. And so I think she was at work, and she had an old shitty guitar laying around the house. And Gus had emailed me and been like, I don't think they're going to go for it. They're, happy with the direction they're going, this and that. And so I picked up this crappy old beat up Jackson that was kicking around her house. And I came up with what became Gangrene from the first album.
Nice.
And I just sort of, I write everything out in tablature, just because I can't remember all the fucking riffs any other way anymore. And so I sent Gus this MIDI demo of it and the MIDI file. And I'm like, hey, this is funny. And he tracked live drums to it. And then he got Dan Gonzalez to record the guitar tracks. And he sent it back to me, and I was kind of shocked when I heard it, because I was like, I don't know if it's just because I have a huge ego and I think that everything I come up with is amazing, but this sounds really fucking good, dude.
Yeah.
And Gus is like, no, this sounds really good. Like, we should do something with it. And so then I think Closed Casket and Psychic Twin maybe were the next 2 songs. And we recorded a demo very quickly. And then we got signed, and then now 7 years later, here I am. And I didn't really take it It's not that I didn't take creating the music seriously, because I tried really hard to make it as good as I could, but I didn't take the project seriously. I remember telling my wife, girlfriend at the time, she's like, another band? Like, holy shit, do you just ever stop? And I was like, oh, honey, we'll never play live. This is just going to be like a one-off thing. Like, you know, I think a few people will probably really like it. A smaller number of people will really hate it. And then that'll be it. And obviously I was completely wrong. And so, yeah, now we're working on the fourth album, which will be like our human album.
Oh, cool. I was going to ask you that if you're going to kind of progress. That's very cool. That's very interesting. Yeah, I found, I guess, yeah, with Savage Lands, I was at a record store. So this was shortly after it came out. I was at a record store and I think they had it up on the wall. And I'm like, what is that? I recognized that, you know, had Repka
Right.
painting. And then I looked, you know, I saw the Gruesome. I'm like, that looks like Death's, kind of looks like Death's logo. What is this? So I pulled it down and flipped it over, like, shit, Matt Harvey's in this band. What is this? Like, so I, you know, bought it immediately, and yeah, and I've been a fan since that day. It's great. It's very cool. Yeah, and I think, yeah, anybody that's a Death fan should definitely check it out. It's really fun. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not trite. It's very respectful, but it's really fun to listen to, and it feels like a lot like a Death album. It's very cool. I mean, you got Chuck's vocals pretty damn good, and the guitar work is incredible. So yeah, I love it. It's great. You know, and you got a great band. You put together a really cool band.
I mean, Gus deserves the credit for that. I was like fucking getting drunk in England. He was like, well, what do you think about Dan Gonzalez? What do you think about Robin Mason? I was like, oh, I love Dan and Robin. That's great. And I'm really good friends with one of Dan's old girlfriends who I've known for years. And so I emailed her. I'm like, hey, Lynn's like, I'm going to get in a band with your ex-boyfriend. Is that okay with you? Is that going to be weird? And she's like, no, it's awesome. Dan's great. And I remember telling Dan that, and he thought that was pretty funny. But I think the important thing, you know, that I always try to say, just by way of disclaimer, and we've tried to make it abundantly clear from the beginning, is, and you mentioned it, but it really is done in a way where we feel a great amount of respect for the material that we're paying tribute to.
Yeah.
And we've tried to just, you know, if someone's out there who's like, this is fucking stupid, I already have Death albums, like, why do I need this? I think that is a completely fair analysis. But at the same time, you know, hey, if you're interested, then that's great too. But, you know, we really approach every record with a great deal of not just enthusiasm and appreciation for the source material, but a lot of, you know, pretty studious research. I mean, for Twisted Prayers, beyond just even the band, Jarrett Pritchard, our engineer, he called up Scott Burns and got on the phone with him for like an hour and a half. And he's like, hey, what amps did you use? This is what I heard. Is that right? What kind of microphones did you use? Like, what were the trigger sounds for the kick drum and stuff like that? And so it really, you know, there's a lot of attention to detail put into it, because we really do just have nothing but respect for the material that we're paying tribute to. And before we even got signed, we reached out to Eric Greif, who I mentioned earlier, and we're like, hey, is this cool? Like, are you going to get pissed? Is Chuck's family going to get pissed? Like, you know what I mean? Because that would be the worst thing for me, is that we put out this record, we're like, hey, this is great tribute. And, you know, Beth, Chuck's cousin, who's still kind of involved, you know, if she was like, what the fuck, are you trying to make money off my dead relative, you piece of shit? Like, I would feel awful as a fan. So from the beginning, and you know, we did a track with Sean Reiner. We've had James Murphy on a couple of tracks. You know, Terry Butler will come and play if we're, you know, together. We've done some shows with Obituary, and he'll come out and play with us and stuff. Cool. So we tried to make it really clear to the audience that this is done with the full knowledge and blessing of people from the original Death camp. And cool, if you don't like it, that's fucking great. Like, I totally get it. But we're coming from it in the best way that we know how, and we're doing it the most respectful way that we know how, because we're not out here trying to make a fucking buck off some dead dude's work and take credit for it as our own. and there's not that much money in what we do anyway. It's a very stupid way to make money, but I just want to, we try to really, and we talk about it on stage every night that we play, and so on and so forth. So I just want to stress that for anybody who's maybe not familiar with the band.
Yeah, I think it's a very respectful approach to the music, and yeah,
Nice.
you've always been very honest about why you're doing what you're doing, which is cool. And yeah, I mean, and just the prowess of the band. It's for that reason alone. I mean, just it's a great they're great records to listen to. Just
Thanks.
I mean, if you want to hear some really amazing guitar work, drumming, bass work, it's incredible. I love it. It's great.
Oh, cool.
And it's cool to see. I remember when I first, like I said, when I first got I guess it was the first album, and flipped it over and saw the pictures, and like I saw Robin, I'm like, hey, she sold me so many t-shirts.
Right, half of your closet is probably from Robin. I mean, even everybody else that's into metal.
Yeah, like, hey, I know her. Yeah, which is cool. So you're also, and I know, I don't know if hiatus is the right word, but Decapitator, your thrash metal band,
Right.
which you guys haven't done anything for a while, but it still exists, correct?
I mean, in the most technical sense of the word, we played a show a couple years ago. And it was okay. It's kind of tough because, really there was always myself and our drummer and our bass player, and I'm like I mean, I have a day job, but it's kind of like, thank God I have for the last year and a half, but that's kind of like my side hustle, like basically I'm a professional musician or whatever, and the other guys are very much dads, and when we got together, it was a little bit like, I felt a little bit like Apollo Creed and Rocky 3, like, oh boy. All right, guys, so this is what practicing is like, this is what rehearsing is like come on, dudes. And the show went okay. It wasn't amazing. But I don't know that it wasn't like really great, and we all felt like, oh, let's write some new songs kind of thing. People do bring it up to me from time to time, and we did have some material that was written after the last record, in whatever that was, 2005, 6,
a while back.
yeah. But it's not I'm not sure that anything will really happen, although like the first album just got reissued on vinyl and cassette this past year.
Oh,
so
yeah, right.
It's kind of weird that people are, I guess, coming back around to it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess everything's kind of cyclical in some ways, and there's a lot of, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of stuff being, which is good, I think, because there's a hungry young metal crowd out there that I think really loves older stuff, stuff that our generation of music,
right?
Which is cool to hear and cool to see. I mean, I'm on a lot of boards, metal boards on Facebook and whatnot. And yeah, it's cool to see, like, kids, basically, I call them kids because they're the same age as my children. And yeah, and they're like into all these bands that I was, like Exhumed, and, like the early Exhumed stuff, and talking about it. I'm like, that's really fucking cool that you guys are into this stuff,
Right. Well, I think, it's not just the metal scene, but it's sort of especially obvious in the metal scene, because any style of music, there's only so much you can do with it. And the first Sabbath record came out in '69. So that's like, what is that? Yeah, that's 52 years ago. Right. So anyway, I feel like the ground has been pretty well trod, and you're not really going to hear much that's super innovative without just being something else. But at the same time, you see it in all pop culture. I mean, I'm 45, so I, vaguely remember the bit of the 70s, and like Happy Days was a huge show in the 70s. And then in the 80s, there was Wonder Years, which was with Fred Savage growing up in the 60s. And then, of course, in the 90s, they just sort of gave up on coming up with good titles, and then they did that 70s show. And then there was about, it seems like from the early 2000s until a few years ago, I mean, the 80s revival seemed like it lasted like 15 years,
right.
Which is great, because I love that's my my favorite decade of music and culture. And now we've sort of moved into this 90s thing where, you know, the pit viper glasses and fucking,
Right.
you know, everyone's into basically the shit that was coming out when I was in high school, you know?
Yeah.
I live in a pretty small town, and, you know, before the pandemic, I remember we went to a bar sort of in the next town over, and it was like this young kind of crust punk kid. It was the middle of the day. There was only like 5 people in the bar, and the crust punk kid goes up and fucking puts on the internet jukebox. Supposed he put on fucking Chapel of Ghouls, Hammer Smash Face.
Oh,
and I was
wow.
like, welcome to my junior, sophomore year of high school. Like, okay, everything, you know, and so, and now, even now, I'm already seeing people starting to kind of get nostalgic for not just like the underground stuff, but like it seems like new metal is like getting really popular again, and it's popping up on all these festivals. And I mean, I hate new metal, but I have to think that it's going to be good for my career, because eventually people will look at the first Exhumed album and be like, man, 99, that was the time for metal, dude. You know, Destroy the Opposition and Amongst the Catacombs and Nephrin Ka, and, you know, Black Force Domain and gore metal, and all those records that were sort of, you know, coming through the underground at that time. So, you know, it's hopefully I'm just waiting around, and hopefully we'll be able to make some more money and have more people interested in the band. But that's just kind of the nature of, you know, pop culture.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that more and more. It seems like there are younger people that are discovering, a lot of the death metal and grindcore and stuff like that from that era, which is cool and interesting to, you know, see the kids are, you know, checking that stuff out. It's good. That's a good thing. Yeah.
It's definitely like one of the trippy aspects of getting older. I remember the first time there's 2 things that really hit me sort of in the, I guess it was the early 2000s, maybe late 90s. One was the first time I heard Van Halen on a classic rock station.
Right.
Like, this isn't classic rock. Like, the Doors are classic rock.
Yeah.
And then the next one was I saw a car commercial using How Soon Is Now by the Smiths.
Oh, wow.
I was like, so I guess people that are 32 are buying really expensive cars now, because like this takes me right to like high school. Like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's weird. It's bizarre. Yeah, it's like, when you go to the grocery store and Van Halen songs on the, like, what the hell? Like, can you guys be playing like Anne Murray or something? I don't like, this is too weird.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if they start playing Exhumed, then I know that I'm really old.
We know that American culture has truly descended to its lowest ebb.
Not to dwell on it too much longer, but just to circle back a little bit. One thing I was going to mention earlier, and I forgot to mention, was, and it's well, just barely a year, I think, that a split. You did a split, which was super cool. You Exhumed and Gruesome together,
Right.
so 2 songs, right? I think, which is awesome. That was great.
Well, the whole concept was originally we were going on tour together. And so we were going to do, you know, obviously being in both bands, I'm privy to the sort of creative process in both camps. And I knew that both bands had some extra songs laying around. You know, Gus, our drummer in Gruesome, he had written these 2 songs that were sort of more leprosy-ish. And I was like, these are cool songs, but like moving forward, I have no idea what we would do with them, because we're not doing that anymore. And with Exhumed, we had started to do an extra EP during Death Revenge, but we ran out of time in the studio. And so those songs didn't fit with horror at all. And so they kind of got reworked and then repurposed into the stuff of this split.
Nice.
And it would have been great. You know, we would have had a brand new record out. We'd be on tour together, and, you know, it was sort of like a marketing / creative outlet. You know, it wasn't so cynical. Obviously, we all thought that songs were really good, but the reason, the impetus between doing it was like, hey, we're on tour together. This will help hype the tour. These songs will get heard. Great. And then obviously the pandemic happened, and that was shit canned, and we may try and revisit it in the future. You know, we'll see what happens. I don't know.
That would be an amazing tour. That would be an amazing tour.
It'd be tiring.
I'm sure. Yeah, especially for you. And for those that are interested in checking that out, it's on Relapse Records. So definitely jump on there and Jump on their website and you can order that right now. So yeah, cool, really cool stuff. Really cool to have those two bands, yeah, two killer bands on a split. And the cool thing, that's something that's kind of cool too. I've noticed this, to kind of this retro thing that we were talking about. There seems to be, splits were a big thing back in the day, and starting to see more of that now, especially because there's my wife and I were talking about this earlier. One thing that's really cool about the technology now is you don't have these, I mean, you still have the big record companies, but now there are so many small companies and people can record in their own homes.
Right.
And so there's a lot of creativity out there, which is cool, and people can get stuff out easily and cheaply, whereas in the past it was not so easy.
Right. And the other thing is that, the album format that, certainly you and I grew up with, of a 40-minute album with two sides, really that's not an artistic decision. That was simply the physical limitations of vinyl. And so vinyl was king for so long that just became the norm. You have an album, it's 40 minutes, it's 20 minutes per side, blah, 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 blah. And, now, because physical sales are not the key sort of driving focus of the label, because they're not the most lucrative thing, physical sales now are more for collectors. It's all about the streaming money. And so there's less pressure to always have an album, or you're more flexible. You can just do like, hey, we just have these two songs. Like, you can still do something with them, whether it's a 7-inch or a digital single or a Bandcamp thing, or, and so without the physical constraints of the media, the format in which people digest music, becomes looser. I don't think it's completely dissolved the album format yet. But in the future, a 40-minute album will seem totally arbitrary. It's like, why 40 minutes? Why not 110 minutes? Why not 15 minutes? Like, who cares,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and it's probably because of my age. Yeah, and I have a ridiculously large record collection and vinyl collection, and I'm an album guy. I listen to albums, and
that's what I prefer. I like to just sit and listen to the whole album straight.
And it's absurd, I'll buy an album on vinyl, and then I'll download the album so I can listen to it at work, on my computer. So I pay twice, but it's plus it comes with the download. But I love the album. It doesn't even have to be a concept album. I just love, and I kind of listen to music in terms of albums a lot of times. And I guess it's just, my age.
It's, it's still the norm, and I think maybe for the next 10, 15 years, it might still be the norm then, but not for much longer, because there's going to be an entire generation of people who, were born in 2005 and, when physical sales were plummeting. And it's just, like I said, to me, it makes total sense. There's two fucking sides. They're 20 minutes long, and you order your songs in a certain way that makes sense for this format. And, it's all sort of sequenced around this thing that doesn't necessarily need to exist anymore,
Yeah, that makes sense. So speaking of our age, let's go back in time a little bit. Well, maybe a lot. How did you originally get involved in music? What was the impetus there?
Well, I guess, I was, my grandmother, she used to play organ in the mortuary, and she would teach some neighborhood kids piano and stuff. And she's a pretty good pianist. And my uncle was a jazz fusion guitar player.
Oh, wow.
So I kind of, they weren't like direct inspirations, but at least I sort of knew that music was a thing that you as a person could do. You didn't have to be like a guy on TV or whatever.
Right.
And, there was sort of a perfect storm when I was, about 12, where, my parents were getting divorced. I just transferred to a new school where I didn't know anybody. And of course, 12-year-old boy, you start getting hair and new places and pimples and all this kind of stuff. So there was a lot of sort of alienation and angst going on in my life. And that was right at the time when I first heard Master of Puppets, you know, which was like one of those like 12 tapes for a penny record club things.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
Anyway, you know, I got like Wasp and like the White Snake self-titled album and a couple Dio tapes and the Ozzy Randy tribute and Quiet Riot and Somewhere in Time and so on and so forth. And the last two tapes that I listened to were Master of Puppets and Peace Sells, but Who's Buying, because they were kind of the scary ones, you know.
Right.
Like 11 or 12 at the time. And basically, as soon as I heard Battery, you know, I was kind of shocked and scared, but also it was like the answer to a prayer I didn't know I had been praying. It was like finally something that sounded as angry and alienated and defiant as I felt emotionally, but couldn't articulate. And as soon as I heard that, the end of the song, you know, where it's like, as soon as I heard that beat turn around, I was like, whatever that is, that's what I fucking want, and I just want more of it. And you know, then I listened to Megadeth tape, and I was like, well, that's pretty good. But it's not as good as Metallica, and the singing is like really weak compared to, you know, Hetfield. And of course, then that led to, you know, hearing Rain and Blood a couple months later, and then Venom, Celtic Frost, Onslaught, Creator, Battery, Sodom, so on and so forth, and this sort of perpetual quest for what's the heaviest, fastest thing. And I was just utterly obsessed. I was at a new school. I didn't know anybody. You know, I was just sort of angry. I didn't want to participate in school activities. So I decided I wanted to start my own band, and my dad had an old acoustic guitar sitting around the house, and I picked it up and started screwing around with it because my parents were like, we're not just buying you like $400 worth of music gear.
Right.
Play this old acoustic guitar for a couple months, and if you're still sticking with it, then we'll talk. And obviously I stuck with it, and we talked, and then here I am, you know, 30
Nice.
years later.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. I'm sure are your parents like, wow, that paid off. That was that was a good decision.
You know, I think they're finally kind of, it's really only been in the last few years that they've kind of come around to that, you know, because I think, you know, the last 10 years since Exhumed has gotten back together, as far as like my music career has been much more like a career, and it's been much more sort of organized and, you know, professional. Whereas when we were doing the early Exhumed records and stuff, like despite being on a record label and going on tour with, you know, Morbid Angel and whoever, it really, there was a lot of aspects of what we're doing that was very amateurish and disorganized. And anyway, now, you know, they're like, oh, look, you got your own studio, you and your wife just bought a fucking condo, like,
Right.
you know, you haven't called me to borrow $500 and like, God, it's been like 12 years, like you're like a real person now. And then, so I think they don't understand the music at all.
Right.
My grandmother and my uncle were the only two people in my family that were like, hey, that's pretty good. My parents are like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Right.
But you know, now I think they sort of realize, you know, and like my dad came, we played here in town in San Luis Obispo, and my dad came to the show, and he was just kind of like blown away, like, wow, like people really like your band. It's like, well, yeah, what the fuck do you think? I'm like, traveling all the time, like going
Right.
to
Yeah.
Europe and Japan and fucking South America, like, you know, come on, dude.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know that they think it's a good decision, but I think that they've moved from it's a terrible decision to like it's a neutral decision.
Right. That's good. That's so you'll take that, right?
Right. I'll take it as a win.
So I mean, obviously, in terms of your guitar playing, you know, I mean, Chuck, of course, is an influence, but who were some of your other influences, you know, in terms of not just guitar playing, but as far as vocals and songwriting?
I think, you know, the sort of most, like for Exhumed, especially the most direct ones are, you know, there's Chuck, there's Mille from Creator, there's James from Metallica, and there's Darren from Sadus. You know, those are kind of the most obvious four. vocalists who play guitar, especially Darren and Mila, you know, a pretty similar vocal range to what I do.
Yeah.
You know, as far as just like being a guitar player, you know, I think as time has gone on, I've sort of gravitated more towards like, you know, Richie Blackmore, Uli John Roth, and you know, Michael Schenker, and guys like that. That's sort of what moves me more than like just total shredding and like crazy techniques or whatever.
I was curious about that because it seems like your, you know, if you look at your career, it seems like the later stuff you're doing has, I don't, not that it wasn't in before, but it seems even more melodic now, I think in some ways. And like, yeah, I kind of wondered about your influence. It seems like it's changed. I mean, it's not drastically, but I mean, it seems like there's, I don't know, maybe even just the tone is different a little bit.
I think, you know, in terms of, you know, the change over time, not that Exhumed is like a terribly melodic band, but I think we become more musical, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way, you know, before a little bit before we did the first album, what we kind of we started getting, we weren't, it was like the mid 90s and we weren't really into black metal so much, and kind of the, you know, we weren't into Pantera, we weren't into Typo Negative and the things that were kind of going on, and so we started going backwards, and rediscovering the thrash stuff that we grew up on, and also rediscover, you know, kind of discovering really for the first time, you know, a lot of the classic metal stuff. And I think what I sort of learned about myself is I just like good songs. Like, I mean, I you know, I listen to, I mean, today I listen to like Mission of Burma and The Cure and like the Buzzcocks, and I listen to everything pretty much except reggae and opera I'm not really into, but and what I like, I just like good songs, and good songs generally are kind of poppy and they have like choruses and hooks and stuff. And so that was our goal with Exhumed, you know, and sort of in the mid 90s, it was like, well, we, you know, we have these riffs and they're pretty cool, but we're not putting them together in a way that's compelling and makes sense, because that was not in style back then. You know, it's like I listened to records like Indecent and Obscene or like Pierce from Within, and I'm like, these riffs are cool, but like, what the this isn't really like a song, you know. And it's no disrespect, I mean, it's just like you have to be really good to pull that off. Like Obituary, their songs are more just like jams, but they work because it's Obituary. But most bands, when they do that, it just sounds like gobbledygook. And so anyway, we kind of realized, well, we're not geniuses, so we need to sort of learn about these kinds of structures and incorporate them into what we're doing. And that sort of by default pushed us more and more towards aligning with like a regular like rock and roll band. You know, we're all like, or most of us, I should say, are really big like Kiss fans and you know, stuff like that. And that kind of seeped into our approach. It's still death metal. It's still, you know, bordering on grindcore because most of it's really fast, but it's put together in a way that is more in line with what would be like normal music. Cause that's, I mean, that's just sort of what clicks with me. And so I think that, yeah, we've become more musical. And to me now, the main difference between where I was now versus when I started, I still love the same records. You know, I'll still listen to Horrified or, you know, Agent Orange or From Enslavement to Obliteration, get just as pumped as when I was 13. But now I sort of see there's an interconnectedness that, you know, you can kind of go back from the most extreme grindcore to like Little Richard in a way that makes sense to me. Whereas back then it was so new and overwhelming, and I didn't really have the musical training or the knowledge to kind of put it in a context. Whereas, you know, to me, I was like, there's absolutely like no connection between Kill 'Em All and Recon Putrefaction. It's totally different. And it's like, well, no, it's not. It's just sort of gradation and like a branching off from a tree. So to me now, I have a hard time differentiating between what's supposed to be what, because to me, it's just all music or it's all rock and roll. I just know what I like and I know what gets me stoked, and that's kind of what I focus on.
Cool. I love that. Yeah, I'm very much the same way, I think, in a lot of ways. where I'm definitely a metalhead, but yeah, I listen to a lot of different things, and yeah, there's a lot of interconnectedness, I think, and yeah, kind of roots of some of this stuff.
Right.
And I think it's good to understand where some of these movements came from and why. I mean, sometimes they're reactionary, but sometimes they're not. They're actually building on, different styles, and and it's, even though it doesn't sound the same initially.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I always think about like excuse me, like American metal, like circa 82, 83, whether it's Motley Crue or Exodus or Metallica, like it's really just a response to like British music and sort of emulating British music. And if you listen to some Diamond Head songs, you think that it's more like Motley Crue, and then if you listen to some other Diamond Head songs, you think that it's more like Metallica or Exodus.
Right.
As they got sort of more divergent, they reacted to each other. And anyway, so it's all sort of it's all interconnected and without context, and that's why I guess I've stopped placing any value whatsoever on like originality, because if you have the right context, nothing is original. Like, and that's
Right.
not trying to make excuses for my own bands being derivative. We've never hid the fact that we come at things based on being fans of what we do, and we're very absolutely fucking honest about it, which I think maybe is not the best publicity strategy. But but the thing is, like, when I heard Metallica in 1986 or 87, whenever it was, probably 87, I had no context for it. So to me, it was the most original thing I'd ever heard in my life. Now I listen to Master of Puppets and, certain songs, especially like Sanitarium. Well, I'm like, this is just 3 songs put together. It's the intro from Roundabout by Yes, simplified. The whole middle section is it's a new wave British heavy metal song called Rainbow Warrior by Bleak House. And then the end has like one Metallica riff, and then it's Tom Sawyer. It's just 3 songs smushed together and like one James Hetfield riff. And I fucking love Sanitarium. That's not a diss at all. That just to me is like, if I have a good buddy who's a brewer, and whenever I drink beer with him, if we try something new, he's like, oh, this is really good because they did this and this, and I wonder if they did that. Whereas to me, I'm just like, oh, that's good, or not. I have no fucking idea. So it's just, it doesn't spoil it for me. But originality is just a matter of the context of the listener.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, like we were saying before, I mean, yeah, everything's, especially now, everything's kind of built off of everything, in a lot of ways. And even, before, I mean, you look at, well, you mentioned Richie Blackmore, you look at, those early Deep Purple. I mean, he was literally doing Mozart and Bach solos, which was cool, but it's like, he didn't write that.
No, the band is just basically, I mean, and again, Deep Purple's one of my favorite bands. It's not a fucking diss. It's just
me too.
A clear-headed musical analysis is that a lot of Deep Purple is just Led Zeppelin with a Baroque solo.
Yeah.
It's great. I fucking love Baroque music. I love Led Zeppelin. I love Deep Purple. Win.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of, especially in the kind of journalistic realm, there's this real prize of novelty. I'd see that people call it originality. I call it novelty. It's like, oh, I haven't heard that noise before. And it's like, I mean, if we put a fucking HM2 in front of our guitars, people would be like, oh, it just sounds like Entombed. This is great, or whatever.
Right.
And it's like, no, that's just what that sound is. It does, and that's not good or bad. I'm just saying that the context really like changes everything completely. So you can't separate that from people's opinions.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
I'm petting my dog. I'm not masturbating, I promise.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So you mentioned, let's kind of change gears a little bit here. So you mentioned your brewer friend. So I know, just from chatting with you before, you're a beer fan. You like craft beer.
I like all beer.
Any particular favorites? And you're in kind of, are you in Southern California or kind of middle California?
It's called Central California. I mean, technically, like if you look at California vertically, it's not particularly central, but I'm just basically halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure anybody that's into craft beer is probably familiar with 805 from Firestone Walker.
Oh yeah, great beer.
They're like, their main brewery is like 15 minutes from my house.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So, and in fact, they're so kind of ubiquitous here that I forget that it's technically a microbrewery.
Right.
It's just like in every bar, it's at every liquor store. Like they've got fucking billboards and shit. To me, that's like Budweiser.
Right.
Which is not an insult because I like Budweiser too. But I think, you know, my wife being British is also a big beer drinker. So we're out a lot at, you know, at local places, and we're pretty fortunate. Just kind of within like a few miles of the studio, we have a pretty good cider place. Although there's a better one up the road called Bristol Cider that does like real dry, like British cider that's not overly sweet.
Nice.
There's a brewery just a couple miles down the road called Liquid Gravity, and they actually partnered with. Hold on, I'll grab the can.
Cool.
So it's so important I had to keep the can. They partnered with EC Comics on this very good.
Oh yeah, nice. That's cool.
All their beers are really good. And there's another brewery called There Does Not Exist, which I think is an objectively terrible name for a brewery. But their whole aesthetic, you know, is kind of like, I would call it like stoner metal. It's very in the sort of like High on Fire, Man's Ruin kind of vibe, and they've got a bunch of really good beers. They got a Kolsch called I want to say it's called Sowing the Sun, and they have a Pilsner whose name escapes me, and it's on a day like today when it's 100 degrees. I mean, it's just super crushable.
Nice.
I like lighter beers in general, but I'll go, you know, every once in a while I'll drink like a double IPA. There's a place in Buellton, which is not too far from here, called Figueroa Mountain. They do a really good double IPA called Lizard's Mouth. That's just like tastes way too fucking good to be like a 9% beer. You're like,
yeah,
how did I just drink this whole can? Like, this is trouble.
Yeah, that's always my danger with, especially with the beer pairing thing that I do with this. You know, I get myself in trouble a lot where it's like, this tastes like, you know, it's Cocoa Pebbles, and
it tastes too good.
Now I can't get off the floor. Yeah, always a danger.
Even in the little town where I live, which is like 15 minutes north of here, kind of halfway between San Luis Obispo and Paso Robles, where Firestone is, we have a couple really good breweries. One's called Dead Oak that does a lot of. They got a really good hazy that they call something Clouds, and they've got a really nice, really drinkable Pilsner. There's a brewery called Wildfields that does a great Czech Pilsner. There's a brewery called Tent City that my buddy bartends there, so I feel bad kind of slagging off their beers, but they have a really good Mosaic. The rest of their beers are kind of and there's another brewery called Santa Maria Brewing that does a pretty good, they have like a blood orange IPA that's really tasty. So yeah, we drink we drink a lot of beer at the house, but like I said, I like all beer almost, you know. So I mean, I drink a lot of Coors. I drink a lot of Coors Light. It just depends.
If I'm going out,
yeah, I mean, if I'm going out for a couple beers after work, then yeah, I'll have something that's really good. But if it's Saturday and it's 2 p.m. and I want to remain functional, then you know, then I'll just crush a bunch of Banquets or Coors Lights, or you know, even Budweiser. I like Miller Lite. That's a big one for Exhumed on tour, is Miller Lite. Because you know, if you start drinking at 6:37 and you finish at like 1 a.m. sometimes later, you know, you can't be fucking around with double IPAs and stuff.
Yeah.
So you know, it just, you know, to me, there's a beer for every occasion.
I like the way you think.
I
think you should coin that phrase. I might have to steal that from you.
You can take it. There's a German restaurant right down the street from here that they do the Koenig pills, which is sort of a very generic German Pilsner, which is great for me. And we were there at 6 a.m. the other day watching the Euro Cup football match, the England
Oh,
match.
nice.
Like I said, my wife's English, so we got to do some weird English shit sometimes. And it was great. It was the Koenig was a perfect beer for a 6 a.m. with a breakfast burrito beer, like real easy drinking. I just had like a liter, and then we went on a dog walk trail for like 5 miles, and it was still very functional. So that's kind of you got to choose your weapon.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. I agree. Yeah. So I'm drinking a rye IPA tonight, and actually I will be pairing this with because I just realized even though I've owned the album since it came out, I'm gonna do a pairing, which I'll do a write up and post eventually here in the next week or two. But I'm gonna do it with Twisted Prayers.
Oh, perfect.
So I realized I hadn't paired that one yet.
So where are you exactly?
Oh, I'm in Utah. I'm in Ogden, Utah. So about
shit. Okay.
40 miles north of Salt Lake.
And you guys finally got rid of that 3% bullshit a few years back.
Yeah. We're so draft beer and grocery store beer is 5%, but then all the breweries can do kind of what they want. So in fact, so this one I'm drinking is 6.8. It's from a local brewery. It's actually my brother-in-law, Desert Edge. He's the brewer there. Great beer. It's in Trolley Square. So the next time you're in Salt Lake, hopefully you'll be touring in the not too distant future.
We will be in Salt Lake this fall. Our U.S. tour is getting announced imminently. And actually, the last time we were there, I think it was the last time. It might have been even the time before. I saw a couple of the Visigoth guys. And
cool.
Like, you guys still have that fucking weak ass beer bullshit. And they're like, no, check it out. And I can't recall what they gave me, but it was something local and it was quite good. So.
Well, when you guys play, let me know where you're going to be. Well, I'll definitely be at the show, but so will this be Exhumed?
This will be Exhumed, and we'll have a full tour package that hopefully people are excited about.
Nice.
And we will be in Salt Lake, and I'm not sure when this is airing. So I mean,
soon.
I mean, if it's even next week, like the whole U.S. tour should be announced. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I will be at that show, and I will bring you beer.
Sick. All right.
I will bring you multiple styles. I will bring you beer from Desert Edge. So yeah, I'll bring some growlers for the bus.
To anybody watching this, if you bring us local craft beer, we will, in all likelihood, trade you for merch.
Oh, nice. Cool.
So.
Very cool.
I always like trying new beers, although if it's something like a rye IPA, that's definitely an after the show beer.
Yeah.
That's like, the workday is done. Cool.
Yeah, that could be dangerous. Especially 7% beer probably shouldn't be. Yeah, but they have lower percent. They've got nice Kolsch, nice Pilsner. Yeah, we'll talk.
Cool. That sounds. I look forward to it, man. It's exciting.
Well, I don't want to keep you all evening, but I just have a couple more questions for you. I wanted to ask you about. So one thing I know, you are a comic book fan, correct?
Yes.
Nice. And I think I know I saw something recently and it was really vague. So I wanted to ask you about this. And I wasn't really sure what it was, but it looked like you were doing some collaboration work with Matt Slime.
Yeah. Matt is doing a run of mold figures, mold toys. Like, I'm not sure exactly what their whole terminology is, but they're just like the little plastic molded statuettes. And Matt used to play bass with us in Exhumed. He did a bunch of tours with us, and he's always sort of like our go-to guy. Like if Ross is busy with something else, he's like the first person we call. And anyway, so we've been really good friends for a number of years, and he was talking about it, and I was like, what, again, showing my age, I was a big collector of the Superpowers figures when I was a little kid, which is a DC toy line from the mid 80s.
Yeah.
And each one came with a little mini comic. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool with these little molded figures? Because if you're making up names and you kind of have a storyline, wouldn't it be cool if they came with like little mini comics that sort of expanded the universe and got people interested? Because he talked to me and we kind of developed a loose storyline about it already.
Cool.
And so he was like, yeah, let's fucking do it. And so yeah, so I ended up, you know, I mean, it's very we used the old Marvel method where we're like talk together like this is the story, and then he drew it all, and then I was like fill in the words. Okay, cool, done. So I was sort of the Stanley in the equation. You know, I do some writing. I had a short story or a novella, I guess, published last year.
Cool.
So that's kind of one of my other, I don't know, side hustles to be, maybe. The shitty thing is I do most of my writing on tour because you spend tons of time sitting in the van. So I kind of just got into it because it was a good way to constructive way to use my time. So I haven't done a lot of writing because I haven't been on tour, but
that's cool. That's really cool though. I love that. And well, and you mentioned the, you know, the DC stuff. So obviously you've been reading comics for a long time.
yeah, since like, you know, I think my first couple of comics I got, I think were in 1980. I still have 2 of the first 3, like a couple issues of Spider-Man and an issue of Fantastic Four. And then, you know, by like 84, I was reading pretty religiously. But yeah, I worked in a comic store in the early 90s, and that's actually how I met Ross, our bass player in Exhumed.
Oh, cool.
Before he was in the band, he and our original drummer and we used to play the old Marvel Superheroes tabletop role-playing system.
Oh,
so
nice.
we were really cool, got tons of pussy. Chicks couldn't stay away from us. It was great because every Saturday night there we were, you know, fucking rolling dice and drawing up character sheets and stuff. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I have a fairly large comic book collection myself. So
oh, sweet. What's your thing? Like, what's your?
I was always kind of a Marvel guy. I have a lot of DC stuff, but Marvel was always my thing. In fact, it was what, 3 years ago, I think it was, pre-pandemic. So the first comic book that I remember buying, which I still own, is Ghost Rider number 32, I think. It was 1978.
Oh wow, okay.
I was on a road trip with my parents to McCall, Idaho. And it's the one where, the Ghost Rider is being chased by this guy called the Bounty Hunter. And so I got, just a few years ago, I got the Ghost Rider piece of that tattooed on my left calf.
Very
and
cool.
Then eventually I'm going to do the Bounty Hunter on my right calf. But then the pandemic came, so I didn't do it.
Sure.
But that's the plan. But that's one of my favorite comic books ever. So I just love the art. It's just, I've always loved comic books. They're always so great. It's so fun to read.
I think I'm pretty similar to you because I was always a Marvel guy, but amongst my group of friends, I was the DC guy because they were like straight Marvel only, you know. And I was like, no, you should read Crisis on Infinite Earths. You should read New Teen Titans or Legion of Superheroes, or like, you know, when they rebooted the Justice League and James DeMatteis and Keith Giffen were doing it with Kevin McGuire and stuff. I was like, this is really good. And they're like, oh, it's DC. So I became the DC guy.
Right.
And I'm like, but I was always a Marvel dude, and of course I started with the Spider-Man reruns to the 60s cartoon.
Cool.
And then, you know, of course, the Hulk TV show and the Wonder Woman TV show. And so I started with Spider-Man, then kind of moved to Fantastic Four. I had a big X-Men phase, but I kind of got tired of that. And I was an Avengers guy. So I've had a really great 10 years of going to the movies.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome.
It's really fun. Yeah, and they've kept kept it fairly. I mean, some of it's kind of more in the Ultimate Universe, I guess, a little. Right. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Yeah, sorry, we're geeking out now. But.
Well, it's like all the characters are sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I just totally lost it. Archetypal. There we go. They're all sort of archetypal, and what made sense in Tales of Suspense 55, where Tony Stark's getting blown up by the Viet Cong. Like, you can't do that,
right?
In 2008 or whatever it was that the first movie came out, and so they have to sort of get updated every generation. And but I think they really, for the most part, kept a lot of the core elements like really intact. And
Yeah.
You know, it's really fun, and it's cool to see how they reinterpret it. And you know, most of the time I think it's done pretty well. And you know, it's great when we're on tour, because Ross and I, you know, well, if there's a premiere, like we always will like sneak away.
Nice.
when Endgame came out, we did the sound check. We're like, okay, cool, all right, bye. We threw our guitars down, like, see you guys later. We get in an Uber, like, see ya. And we saw Infinity War in Germany.
Oh wow.
My wife is a fucking executive assistant, so like tracking shit down is like her job. She's really
Nice.
good at it. She's like, okay, so here's in Hamburg, here's the movie theater that's showing it in English, but it's across town and it's only at this time. Like, I'll buy you the tickets online, you know, if you can make it. Like, but you got to tell me by tomorrow. We're like, yes, we're gonna fucking make it. And so it's a, you know, it's a whole thing. I remember when the first Avengers movie came out, it was our last day of tour with Cannibal Corpse, and somewhere in Florida. And we're like, oh, we're gonna have a big party afterwards. Are you sticking around? I was like, nah, dude, it's been a great tour, guys, but sorry, Avengers out. I got to bounce. Like, I've only liked Cannibal Corpse since Eating Back to Life, but I've been into the Avengers like for fucking like 6-7 years before that album ever came out. So I gotta go. I'll see you guys around anyway. It's all good.
Nice.
I was like, what a fucking nerd. It's like, yeah, okay.
Do you still buy? Do you still collect?
No, I mean, mostly I'll buy like trades here and there when the storyline interests me, but it's so prohibitively expensive.
Yeah,
you know,
it's insane.
And especially after taking several years off, because the whole 90s image era just turned me off so much, especially working in a comic store during it. By the time I came back and realized that there's tons of good comics, I was like, you go into a store and I was like, fuck, I don't even know where to start.
Right.
So I just use the Marvel Unlimited app, and you know, I'll read things here and there. Like I read like Devil Dinosaur and Moon Girl, and you know, some newer stuff, and then a lot of older stuff. Like I just read like the first. I read almost the entire first Iron Man series, but the last storyline, like from 66 to like 95 or whatever, but the last storyline was so bad and the art was so terrible. I was like, I can't choke down these last 9 issues. I'm gonna have to just. So I think I'm gonna skip ahead to like the heroes return and go from there. But so I still read a lot of comics, and like I bought a couple of the Injustice trades. Those are really good. I just saw that Jupiter's Legacy show.
Oh yeah,
and I really liked it, so I think I'm going to get a couple of those trades pretty soon.
Cool.
Just check it out, you know. But I mean, we still go to comic stores on tour, and I'll buy back issues of the shit I'm into.
Nice. So, do you have any coveted issues? Anything, or maybe? Well, kind of two-pronged question. Do you have any coveted issues that you own, and then are there any? Is there a white whale? Is there that unicorn that you're looking for?
You know, mostly it's not really a specific issue. It's just more about filling in holes at reasonable prices. I'm a big Silver Age guy, so you know, it's like I have about, I think maybe 60 of the first 100 Fantastic Four issues, maybe
nice,
maybe a little bit less. But it's all about finding one that I can afford that isn't, you know, ripped to pieces. Like I have an Avengers #1, but it's just, you know, you have to be so careful reading it that it's, you know, I wouldn't really let anybody else touch it because it's falling apart, but I could afford it, you know. In terms of what I own, probably Avengers #4, the first reappearance of Captain America. That's like,
oh wow,
my favorite comic that I own. And again, it's not in good shape at all. It's very beat up, but I've had it for years, and it's one of those things, you know. My whole collection's outside in the shop at the studio, but it was one of those things where, like, if the studio was about to burn down, that would be what I would grab. Like, I'd be like, I can get more guitars. It's fine. I can get this fucking box of Avengers out of here.
Yeah, I was gonna say when you took the dog out, I like those look like comic book boxes back there.
yeah, those are all my long boxes.
Yeah, nice, very cool.
Yeah, I mean, basically, like, I'm a Kirby guy. Like, Jack Kirby is kind of my personal hero.
He's the man.
As a creator and as a human being. So I'm always looking just to fill holes, like my Mr. Miracle run, my New Gods run. I think I have all the 70s Cap and Eternals in 2001. I'm definitely missing a lot of Devil Dinosaur and Commandy. And then his 80s stuff for Pacific Comics, like Captain Victory. I think I'm only missing like one now, and like Silver Star, just sort of the more random Kirby ephemera, you know, like that's kind of what I'm always on the lookout for on tour. And I have a Google sheet where that, you know, lists what I had, because I had an app where that I logged all my comics in. Then I got a new phone and reinstalled it, and it was like my username, and they're like, nope. And so I was like, well, fuck that. I'll just make a Google sheet.
So you're pretty serious about, yeah, you. Nice. I love it. That's cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm not a person of half measures, and there's just not that many things that I'm super enthusiastic about. But you know, metal and comics are kind of a big two. Music in general, I guess, being my third. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Yeah, it's like, yeah, metal, yeah, hard rock, comic books,
right,
and then novels. But yeah, like as far as I think my big coveted comic book, right, that I have is it's Fantastic Four. I can't remember the number. It escapes me right now, but it's the first time that Black Bolt made an appearance.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So, and I got it fairly cheap compared to, I mean, now it'd probably be ridiculous, but at the time it wasn't too bad.
That Inhumans TV show was horrible and didn't take off, so you know, the value is probably still fairly low.
Yeah.
I have the whole series. I think maybe missing one issue where the Atalan is like trapped in that dome, and break the Inhumans out and stuff. And yeah, it's great stuff, man. Enter the exquisite elemental and all that kind of shit.
Yeah. Nice. Well, I could nerd out all night, so I better not, because my viewers will get annoyed. So I don't want to keep you all night, but I do. I always finish up my interviews with with one last question, which is, of course, my blog is Brews and Tunes. I pair beer and heavy metal. So Matt Harvey's hanging out on a Saturday night. What beer do you crack open, and what album do you spin? What's your pairing?
I think really, I used to have a ritual where I would get on Fridays, I would get the large Duvel.
Okay.
And then I'd get a 6-pack of Spaten. Just a regular, not the Optimator, just a green bottle, good old fashioned German Pilsner.
Yeah.
And, if I'm doing that, generally I'll just be listening to like Flag of Hate and Persecution Mania and Release from Agony and Infernal Overkill and all that sort of mid-'80s German thrash, because there's something about German beer and German thrash that goes really well together. And it's a little bit tastier than like the American equivalent, which is like, Coors or Budweiser and like, Rain and Blood and The Legacy and Master of Puppets, which is also a great night, but because I think it's a good system to have one real strong beer, kind of get a buzz going, and then you just keep it going with some more regular beers after that.
I like it. I love it. That's awesome. That is very cool. That is very cool.
Easy question. I love those.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Matt. This was really great talking to you.
Absolute pleasure, man.
Best of luck in this coming year. I'm excited to see you guys on tour. You got new stuff coming out, which is super exciting. They'll in the description of this interview, everybody look down below. There'll be links to the Exhumed page, to the Gruesome page. Please check that out. Killer bands. If you haven't heard them before, you need to get into that stuff. You'll love it. So yes, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, brother.
Oh, dude, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. Cheers, man.